This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
About the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
Social programs, they're not lost on the powers that be in terms of the U.S. government. I mean, remember J. Edgar Hoover very early on, describes the most dangerous aspect of the Black Panther Party was in fact their breakfast program.
Indeed.
And the fact that, they were very conscious to name these institutions out of important martyrs within the movement speaks a great deal of the kind of ideological significance that they saw in terms of these institutions. You're watching Left of Black. We're joined by Professor Alondra Nelson, author of the brand new book, Body and Soul, The Black Panther Party and the Fight Against Medical Discrimination. That's University of Minnesota Press, 2011. If there's a real great success story out of this moment for the Black Panther Party, is the work that they do on the ground, and probably better than any other institution, in getting the word out for African Americans about sickle cell anemia. Of course, this is research that's coming out. Folks are starting to put together the dots, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, if you will. But at the same time, the challenge of getting the word about this out to everyday folks, and the Black Panther Party, through their clinics, really did an extraordinary amount of work in this regard.
Yeah, I do think it was extraordinary. I mean, they did pretty incredible public health education, and they used their newspaper, they used television appearances. I write about an appearance on the Mike Douglas show that we old heads will remember. The young heads will have to Google it to look up what it was. But it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, to be on the Mike Douglas show, they were on the week where Yoko Ono and John Lennon were hosting, were guest hosting, and a guy named Don Williams, who was a medical student, an African American medical student at Stanford at the time, who was working with the party on their sickle cell work, talks in fine technical detail about what sickle cell anemia is on a molecular level. In their newspaper, they ran, there was a cover image of the difference between circular, healthy red blood cells and sickled blood cells. They showed people sort of microscopic images of the slides. And they also showed, in a kind of genealogical sense, how this genetic disease was passed from parents to children. It was actually quite extraordinary. In addition to that really sort of nuts and bolts work that they did around spreading about education, doing public outreach and education about the disease, they also had a kind of ideological spin about the disease that was quite fascinating. So some of the disease, the way that the disease was interpreted, for example, in sort of evolutionary biology, as many of your viewers will know, was related to whether or not a region had malaria and the ways in which the carrier status for sickle cell anemia could provide protection against malaria. And so that was the sort of historical evolutionary reason why the adaptation for sickle cell came to evolve. But the Panthers put a whole other spin on that and linked that adaptation to the Middle Passage and to slavery, and said, effectively we have this disease because we're strangers in a strange land, and that this strangeness manifests itself on a genetic level, and this is why we have sickle cell anemia disproportionately as a people.
One other thing that was also significant about the Panthers at this period of time was the pushback that they engaged in terms of the use of black bodies as kind of a terrain of medical experiential, experimental medical work being done. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I think what the Panthers are so important, particularly in this moment where we've been talking as a community about Harriet Washington's book Medical Apartheid, and more recently about Rebecca Skloot's work on Henrietta Lacks and her family. The Panthers offer us an example of how black communities resisted and refuted these kinds of claims, pathological claims about black bodies. And I think it's an important counterpoint for the narratives about medical apartheid. We absolutely need those narratives, but we need to also understand that if we look back across African American history, there have been important moments where black communities have challenged these kinds of claims about black bodies and medical discrimination. And I think it's an important legacy for us to sort of take up, and it's also a usable past for contemporary health politics. And as I try to suggest in the book, the Panther health activism was unique from, say, women's health activism of the 1970s, and that it had to attend to the fact that black communities historically were both underserved by the medical community, so that part of their activism was about getting access to health care, but part of it was about protecting communities from medical abuse.
Right.
And I think this makes Black political activism in some ways kind of distinctive, right? Health social movements are often about access, but the Panthers also had to protect the communities. And the case I write about is a situation in 1972 at UCLA, 1972-73, where some researchers at that university were trying to start a center to study biological models of violence effectively. And some of the research proposals were more controversial than others. On the more controversial spectrum were research studies that were disproportionately targeted to Black and Latino male youth, both, and those that are incarcerated, and also those in Los Angeles public schools. And one of the research protocols proposed using invasive brain surgery as a way to curtail violence. So there was this sort of assumption that the urge to violence was a biological one. It was some sort of biological mistake that could be corrected through some manipulation, invasive manipulation of the brain. And the Panthers really, for lots of reasons, right? I mean, I think that moment in the Black Power mixtape where Angela Davis is talking about the causes of violence, right? You know, that moment in that documentary is just so powerful, really sort of sums up what the Black Panther argument was against this center, right? Which was that violence is about state oppression, violence is about police brutality, violence is also about U.S. imperialism in the Vietnam War. You know, violence is, as H. Rap Brown said, as American as cherry pie, right? And so to try to isolate it and make it about individual Black bodies was just ridiculous in the sort of Panther ideological frame. And also if you think about the way in which they took up the sort of philosophies about what violence was and what it meant from the work of Fanon and Che Guevara, you know, they had a thoroughgoingly different definition and understanding of violence.
You're watching Left of Black. We've been joined this afternoon by Professor Alondra Nelson, who is the author of the new book, Body and Soul, The Black Panther Party and the Fight Against Medical Discrimination, University of Minnesota Press, 2011.